Quick introduction about myself. Like was mentioned, I come from Mode. Mode is a startup that builds products for data analysts and data scientists. So we build a data science platform that folks can use to be able to create analytical work, share that work out with other folks around the organization, build reporting and dashboarding, but also build sort of more advanced analytics products, and then be able to distribute that to their customers. And so the reason sort of we're here is not just because we are kind of part of this ecosystem, but because we also see a lot of the things that our customers build. And so a lot of the conversations that I'm having with folks that are using Mode is trying to figure out like how do we build the infrastructure that we need to be able to get the value out of our data. So in this case, they're trying to build some charts or dashboards like this, or kind of anything that you might imagine. They basically believe, we have value in our data, we know it's an important thing, and we want to be able to build the kind of tooling on top of that to actually be able to extract that. And so we have a lot of conversations with folks about doing that, and have kind of developed a good sort of playbook for how to help people that are just getting started set this up very quickly. And that's the thing I want to share with you all tonight, is what does that sort of template look like? What is the sort of easy way to build this out, to set it up in such a way that not only can you have it very, very quickly, but also how can you have something that actually scales as your business grows? That it's not something that's sort of a quick thing that you build out and then you eventually tear down 6 months later. It's something you can actually scale out to being very big and grow with your business pretty well. So before getting into some of the details, kind of a quick overview of the things I'll talk about. First, all of y'all are here already, so you probably have some belief in why data matters to your startups. But I can run through a couple of examples of that that are maybe particular reasons that I think can be particularly impactful for early stage companies. I'll also give a kind of an introduction to this modern data stack that we help people sort of set up. There's a lot of new tools out there. There's a lot of different ways to be able to build this, and we again have a kind of a particular philosophy on a good way to do this, that you can do it very quickly and scalably. So I'll kind of give an introduction to what that looks like. I will then give a live demo of actually setting that up. So most of this you can do like live in a real demo. I will attempt to do that as best you can in any live demo. We'll see how it goes. And then at the end, I'm happy to do Q&A as well as kind of any hands-on help if folks are trying to do this themselves. Again, all this is stuff you can do quickly, and if you're running into hang-ups, I'm happy to kind of come around and help folks with that at the end. With that, why invest in data? Like, why does this matter at all? If you're a startup, why should you care? I think like this is it's a pretty well accepted thing at this point. This is a quote from Sequoia Capital, wrote this big series of articles about why startups should invest in data. Their overarching point was it's a must-have. It's not an afterthought. It's something that you should do along with when you set up your email and you set up ways to communicate with your customers and you set up your infrastructure for building your product. It's just kind of part of that ecosystem now. And so I think a lot of people kind of accepted that, but it's still kind of useful sometimes to step back and say, like, well, what is it that I actually get out of this? Like, what's the real value potentially for me? So there's a few examples of this, I think, that are sort of the non-obvious ones, or ones that are good to highlight for kind of tangible examples of ways to get value out of data. One of those is when you're an early stage company, having data is often the best way to prioritize. And as early stage companies, like, time is the most important thing. You can't really waste time making bad decisions or focusing on areas that don't matter. And so data is often a really good way to be able to prioritize those most important things so that you take the very limited resources you have and use them wisely. Like an obvious example of this is, say that you're building a product where people go to a website and try to purchase something. If you look at a funnel, which this is kind of an example of what a funnel might look like, you want to be able to focus on the area of the funnel where people are dropping off. You want to be able to know like which part of this is the one that actually matters. That you may think, oh, I need to go from visiting website to signing up for a trial. We really need to spend a lot of time helping people get into a trial. But it doesn't look like that's actually the problem here. It's actually, they're not entering credit cards. And so that very much changes the decisions you make. And you can't really do this without having good visibility into how people are actually using your product. To give a more concrete example of this, that's kind of an easy example that is sort of obvious in some ways. But a more concrete example of this that actually had a real impact on a customer of ours. So there was this company called The Knot. A lot of people may not be familiar with it, but you've probably used it. It's the company that hosts websites for people who are having weddings. So if you go to a dylanlovesharon.com when your friends get married, that website is often hosted by the Knot. They support a lot of the sort of infrastructure around that. And so they actually, a few years ago, released a mobile app. And they were like, because we're like everybody else, said, hey, mobile is the future here. We want to make sure that then when people are setting up these websites, they can do it in a really great way for people on their phones. So they released this mobile app, and when they first released it, they weren't getting a whole lot of traction. And they were like running into problems figuring out what was going to make it successful. And so they were trying to spend a bunch of resources to decide, like, hey, where do we invest our feature development? What area do we focus on? And so they never really found anything that stuck until they started looking into their data. And they made this chart. This was one of the ways they tried to explore that data. And the specifics of this visualization aren't as important as this brown spike down here. What this kind of brown thing in the bottom right is it was representing there's a bunch of people who come to their mobile app and go to one page and one page only. And they would do that consistently. And so they dug into that and they realized this one page that they go to was actually like the countdown to your wedding. So it'd be like, you're getting married in 83 days, you're getting married in 82 days. And some people kept going back to it every day. And what they were doing was they were taking screenshots of that page and then like posting it on Instagram, being like, oh my God, I'm getting married in 82 days. And so they realized because of that, they actually had an opportunity to really lean into that. And they made that page much better for that. They made it easier for you to like put a background picture of you and whoever you're marrying on there. They made it easy for you to be able to share it over social media. They like really found ways to lean into that user behavior that they had no idea that's what was going to happen. It certainly wasn't the intention, but by being able to see that in their data, they could make this decision that ultimately made the app much stickier. So as a startup, that's the kind of thing you want to be able to discover. You want to be able to find these ways that people are using your products and be able to really lean on those rather than kind of throwing noodles at a wall and seeing what sticks. A second part of this, that one of the things that data can be really useful for early stage companies is it's a critical part of fundraising. And as was mentioned, I gave a talk on this about a month ago here about a lot of the pieces that go into that. These are some of the sort of key metrics that often drive fundraising proposals and fundraising pitches for sort of seed and Series A startups. And oftentimes, you're not going to actually be able to close that round unless you have this information. And being able to collect this and report on it well and do it efficiently depends on your data being in a good place. And you can do that a lot better with a stronger data infrastructure. So data is a really key part of fundraising, which for better or for worse is often a key part of building a growing business. And finally, this doesn't get easier. The later you go, if it's something you kind of punt on now and say, hey, we'll get to that. We have core product to focus on, we have other things to focus on, and we'll worry about data once we get there, or once we need it. You're actually setting yourself up for a much harder problem down the road. And as an example of that, like what often we see happening when people don't tend to invest in this early is they'll essentially set something up very early with like Google Analytics. They'll start looking at just traffic through something like that. They'll start realizing, hey, we want to ask a little bit richer questions, what Google Analytics can do. They'll start putting stuff in Excel, and somebody will be managing like financial numbers in Excel. They'll get fed up with sharing things over email because sharing things over email is a pain. So they'll start putting it in Google Sheets, and now they have some stuff in Excel because there's somebody who came from an investment bank that loves Excel and hates Google Sheets. And Google Sheets has half their information now. And then they'll start like collecting payment data from Stripe, and Stripe has their own data that they have like in the Stripe portal that people will look at. And some engineer will get fed up with that and will build like a dashboard that's their own little custom dashboard that's pulling data from all these other sources. And then you'll start putting data into Salesforce because that's where you keep track of like sales data. And at some point you have this entire ecosystem of this is where all your data lives in all these different places. And some board member will come along and say, how much money did you make last quarter? And it'll be really hard to answer. And you'll have to be like, well, what does this Excel file say? Google Analytics says one thing. Salesforce says this other thing. This one engineer swears by the dashboard that he built or she built. Stripe says something totally different, and you're like, I have no idea what we actually made. It's a huge pain, and you have to dig yourself out of it, and you have all these different places that everybody relies on a different thing, and you've got to figure out some way to make this all work, and you don't want to be in that situation. If you set this up first, then you don't have to worry about this. You can build like a consistent pipeline where everybody looks for the same information in the same place, and then when you have this board member ask you how much money you make, everybody can give them a consistent answer. So a lot of good reasons to do this. It's also something that you can do very quickly. It's not something that takes a lot of time. It's not something that's like a huge investment to make. You can do it quickly. You can do it reasonably cheaply The things that I'm going to show are all products that are either paid for a relatively low cost or things that have free versions and free tiers that you basically have to pay nothing for. But on net, I think you can get away with doing this for on the order of a few grand a year, and that can scale up to something much bigger. Like as your business grows, you can again scale that to fit your business. So there's not any reason not to do it, and there's a lot of good reasons to it. So what is it? Like, what is it that you'd actually want to set up? What does that modern data stack actually look like? So I can kind of outline this pretty quickly of some of the different pieces of it. And you'll hear different things from different folks. Other people have like slightly different perspectives on how they should build this. But fundamentally, this is what it is that you're trying to build. On the far left of this, you have different data sources. So you have things like website traffic. You have application data. So if you're building like a web app, there's often a database that is the thing behind that web app. It's like the source of truth for when somebody signs up. That user gets created in a database somewhere. Or it's your orders database or something that's like powering your business. And nowadays, you often have a lot of SaaS apps. You have things like Salesforce or Marketo or Intercom or Asana or Stripe or all these other things that are critical to the operations of your business and contain in varying degrees the sources of truth of what's happening. Salesforce may be the source of truth for your sales team. Stripe may kind of be the source of truth for your revenue, but like not quite because maybe you're doing refunds somewhere else or something like that. But you have all these applications to pull things together. Typically then what you want to do is you want to centralize that into a single warehouse. So you have one kind of point that all of this data gets funneled into. That gives you the ability not just to have it centralized and sort of accessible via one entry point, but also lets you combine it. It lets you answer questions that are across how does something from Stripe combine with my tickets that come in through Zendesk with the website traffic that we're getting on our help page. So you can be able to combine that. And then you have some platform that sits on top of your warehouse, like a BI or analytics platform that lets you actually ask those questions and interface with that data in a reasonable way, and then lets you share those insights out to other folks. So the centralized warehouse, this is kind of the hub of it. It is the place that hosts all of your data. The other thing you want to be able to do is you want to build pipelines. So you have pipelines that feed in from these applications into that warehouse. And then you have this platform for visualizing and sharing data. So what is the way that you do this? Like there's essentially a few steps. The first step is really setting up the warehouse. And like a lot of ways, this is the hub of the system. It is where all the data gets fed into. It is where all the data gets spread out from. So choosing that is something that's important. There are a lot of good options out there, obviously, given where we are. Redshift is one that we think is very good. It's good for a number of reasons. So like why Redshift? Like why is it that when we recommend this to new folks, why is Redshift one of the ones that we tend to think works very well? There's actually a few reasons for that we think it's a sort of a great choice here. One is that it's really easy to set up and maintain. So a good part of this is, like an important part of this system is you want it to be low cost. If you're a small startup, you're not going to do this if you have to have like a bunch of DBAs setting stuff up, or you have to have an engineer who's dedicated for maintaining infrastructure. Redshift is super easy to set up. Basically, and you'll see this in a minute when I demo it, you click on a button, you click launch cluster, and that's it. Like then the whole thing is managed and it's ready to go. There are some other options that you have too if you want to be able to do this. Amazon also has other hosted databases that you can run, and then there's other providers as well. But Redshift, we think, is honestly, it's probably the fastest one to set up, and you get a pretty powerful database on the other side of it. The second thing, and I think this is an important point often for setting these things up early, is it speaks kind of a standard SQL. That sort of the interface to most databases is SQL. Some people will try to do other things. They'll try to set up something like Mongo or something like that, or try to use other languages. We are big believers in using something that is much more kind of a traditional SQL database. That is the thing that most people know. If you're an engineer, you more or less know how to write basic SQL. Analysts or data scientists know how to write SQL. Not everybody knows how to write some custom flavor of a custom database that isn't necessarily as easy. And so, to sort of illustrate that, here's like a popularity from Google Trends of SQL compared to some other potential languages. And SQL is obviously like a very popular thing here relative to these. I have no idea why SQL is seasonal, actually. I've never really thought about that, but for some reason people don't do this in the holidays. So that's another really good benefit of Redshift and some of these other options. And a third thing I think that's a really sort of powerful part of this is it's got a strong ecosystem around it. So like I mentioned earlier, this part is the hub of the system. All of your data needs to get fed into it. And then anything that you do on top of it. So if you have analytics applications that sit on top of it, you have BI applications that sit on top of it, you have other like integrations that you want to be able to funnel out to more automated systems. Your warehouse is often the central part of that. And so having like a strong ecosystem of partners and things like that is valuable. Amazon obviously has that, and Redshift, as being one of the first cloud analytics databases, has a very strong ecosystem as well. So it can work pretty well here too. So once you have a database, the second thing you want to do is write data into it. Like how do you actually get data into that warehouse, be it Redshift or anything else. So there's kind of three major categories of different sources of data. One is this web traffic data. The second one are these application databases, which are essentially, you have a Postgres database or MySQL database or something else that's actually powering your application. And then you have these SaaS products that have databases behind them, but you don't actually have access to that you can't interface with Stripe's database. You have to interface with it through APIs and things like that. For getting data out of from web traffic into your warehouse, there's a few options. One that we typically recommend is a tool called Segment. So Segment does a number of different things, but at its core, what Segment is this kind of routing layer that lets you log events on your website or from your mobile apps or from even sort of server-side logging, and dispense it out to other applications. You can write it out to ad tracking software or to tools like Salesforce or Marketo, but you can also write it into databases. And they have an integration with Redshift. They also support integrations with other major cloud providers as well. But by instrumenting Segment, which all it takes is like adding something like this to your website when people take actions, they have this very nice sort of logging API. By instrumenting Segment, you can then dispatch that data into these other tools as well as to your database. So if you want to have all of these event logs immediately funneled into Redshift or your other warehouses, you can do that, and it all kind of manages it for you. It takes care of a lot of the infrastructure pieces of how does it handle failures, how does it handle retries, gives you some nice dashboards into how those events are actually being processed. If you don't want to pay for it, there's parts of this are also open source. They have open sourced this library, so you can do that without having to pay for the service. They also offer a free service depending on the volume of events that you're logging, which I will show you later as well. There's also some other, if you're like want even more open source, there are some other options. There's something called Snowplow that allows you to do this as well. But there's some good logging infrastructures that allow you to easily manage writing data from your mobile apps or your website into a warehouse. The other two major categories here are these application databases or SaaS apps. We see a lot of people trying to spin these up on their own, of like, hey, it's a Salesforce API. I can just write a thing that once a day scrapes the Salesforce API and writes it into a database. How hard can it be? The answer is it's very hard. Don't do that. I have done that before prior to there being tools that actually let you do that. It's a huge pain. You actually now have tools that will do this for some of these integrations for free. For others, it's very cheap. So there's a few of these. A couple of the big ones are Stitch and Fivetran. You'll often hear about those. There's some other smaller ones like EtLeap or EtLeap. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce it. That will do this. The way they work is you basically, well, I have a couple screenshots actually. You fill out connection details for your warehouse. So just fill out credentials here, click a button. You fill out connection details for either like a database that you're trying to sync from or connection details from a tool like Salesforce. And that's it. And then it will manage syncing that data from those applications into your warehouse live. It will, again, keep track of things like updates. It will keep track of retries if APIs go down. So say you're like trying to sync GitHub data and the API goes down like it always does. It will manage that for you. It will catch stuff up. It does a really nice job of basically maintaining this kind of ugly, painful infrastructure that you could build yourself, but you don't want to, and handling it very well. And these tools are all relatively affordable. Some of them, again, have free tiers. I believe Stitch has a free tier. Fivetran does not, but I believe you can get sort of the basic stuff at relatively low volumes like you would typically have for an early stage company on the order of a few $1,000s a year. Don't quote me on that, though. So once you have that, what do? You have data in a warehouse. It's coming from all these different sources. Great. It's all set up. The next thing you would want to do is like analyze that. How do you actually get data out of it? Here, I'm obviously very biased because this is what Mode does. Like you can easily connect Mode to your warehouse. Once you set it up, you can query it directly through our interface, build charts and dashboards and reports on top of that, all the kind of things you want. aside from me being like from Mode, why Mode, there's a few things actually that are in the way that we built the product that we believe are really important for early stage companies to be able to do this well. One is there's no initial setup cost. That if you're trying to build out like a BI application, especially as an early stage company, you don't want to actually put a lot of investment into sort of building that entire application. That you want to be able to ask questions of it very quickly. You're having to make decisions quickly, and you'll often have like, oh, we have an hour to try to figure this thing out, and an engineer wants to be able to move forward on it. Let's do some quick analysis to say like, how many people use this feature? How many people go to this page? You don't want to have to like build an entire sort of model on top of that before you can actually ask questions. So we actually wrote a whole blog post about this, about how like over planning these things, especially early, tends to lead to them never getting done. And so Mode lets you just be able to get stuff started right away. Again, you can just fill out connections to a database, and then you're ready to go. You can start like actually asking questions of your data right away. The second thing I think that's also very important is it works with raw data. So say you're wanting to ask questions of how things are going in your business, especially again early, you don't necessarily know what those aggregate views should look like. You want to be able to look at, say you're trying to debug something. You want to be able to look at exactly what happened to this person. You want to look at logs for a specific user. Some customer might write in because they saw something really funky, and you want to be able to see like exactly what they did. And that raw level data or row level data is very important. And so we built Mode in such a way that actually provides access to that. Again, it's essentially just a query SQL client. So you can be able to do whatever you want on that row level data, again, which can be very valuable for early stage companies. And finally, one of the most important things here is it's very fast to share, that you want to have a tool that's easy to distribute to other people around your business, that often the reason you're doing all of this work is to be able to understand like how people are using your product, to be able to inform an engineer, a designer, a PM, somebody on the sales team, and you want to be able to distribute that very quickly. For folks who are more technical, they often may be tempted to set up like, oh, we have a SQL client that we just use, like a desktop SQL client, that's good enough. We might use something like Jupyter or Studio. Those sort of tools are often difficult to be able to distribute to other folks around your company. If your CEO needs something because they're in a meeting with an investor and they want to be able to look at something very quickly, you want to be able to send them that without having to say like, well, here's the Python code I ran, spin up a Jupyter notebook and run it yourself and then show it. And so Mode, and as long with a lot of other sort of SaaS products that do similar things, obviously make this very easy. That's kind of the benefit of SaaS is it's all just a bunch of URLs. So the last little bit before getting into some of these demos is what does this not cover? Like what are the things that come later? I mentioned that this actually scales very well. This is a pretty simple infrastructure. Like what happens after that? What are the next problems you run into and how do they actually fit into this? One thing is you might want other data sources. So you might not have just these simple few things. You may have things like event streams. You may have custom data sources for applications that you've built or services that you run. There are pretty good ways to integrate this into something like Redshift. So for instance, we have an event stream that we sort of spin up ourselves that is a Kinesis Firehose stream. This is a service that AWS provides that provides nice and easy integrations into Redshift. There's other options too for these sorts of things, but this is sort of the benefit of the robust ecosystem is there's often other ways to write these other data sources directly in. Another thing you might want to do is you actually might want to start doing some modeling and transforming of your data. Like the raw level data, raw data is important early, but once your business starts to grow, you might want to have a simple model for understanding what is a customer. And so you actually want to be able to model that and transform it in your warehouse and do that automatically. We recommend an open source product called dbt. This is a service that the core of it is open source. You can also pay for a hosted version for like $100 a month or something. That what it does is it basically will manage a bunch of like building tables in your warehouse. So say you want to build additional layers on top of your raw data to be able to define what a customer is, what a purchase is, what a return is, all those sorts of things that often have more complex logic in other systems. You can do that. You can do it in just raw SQL. You don't have to worry about writing something like Airflow DAGs, which can be kind of confusing. And you can just do this, and an analyst that knows SQL can manage this. And so we recommend this for folks that are running into that problem. You may have a problem with really big scale. So you may start logging a ton of data. Maybe your warehouse needs to get really big. Again, this is a place where hosted solutions actually do a very nice job. In Redshift's case, you can resize the cluster by just clicking a button that resizes the cluster. You can also pass it into something like Athena. Athena is the way that Amazon has like a separated compute and storage type of warehouse. So if you put data into Athena, it's basically stored in S3, and then compute is you pay for the compute on top of that. So say you have some really, really big event logs, but you don't want to pay for the storage of those, or you want to pay sort of minimally for the storage of those, you can start using services like Athena. And finally, you may have like questions about data governance. Data governance is sort of like the last thing that most people who are working for early stage startups want to hear. But as you grow, it becomes important. There are a lot of systems there that you can build on top of that. All of these different products actually provide nice ways to do that around who can have access to what, who can see what. Amazon obviously has a lot of very robust, if not a little confusing systems built through the IAM layer. Similar for these other products, and they're all kind of designed for more of the like enterprise data governance tooling, which for early stage startups often doesn't matter, but it's good to keep in mind. So with that, I am going to walk through a live demo of how to actually do this. To give you kind of an overview of what this is going to look like, this has to be ordered a little bit in a weird way, because sometimes you'll click a button and you have to wait 5 minutes for something to happen. And so I'll answer some questions during that time, but also don't want to make it so we're sitting around waiting for stuff to spin up. So the way I'll do this is first I will set up Redshift. I'll show you how to do that. Then I will install Segment. So I have like a sample website for a fake company. Then we can put Segment on. I'll show you how to do that. I will then connect Mode to that Redshift database. Once the Redshift database is set up, it takes like 5 minutes for Redshift to actually become available. I then can connect the ETL tools to this warehouse, so we'll be writing data from an application database as well as from some SAS apps into that Redshift database, and then we'll connect Segment. And I may actually connect Segment prior to those, because Segment also takes some time for the internet to happen. So finally, what I'm actually going to have here, I have a few services that I've already set up because they take a little time. I already set up an AWS account. To do that, you have to like fill out a bunch of questions about what company you have. You don't want to watch me fill out a bunch of web forms. I also have an application database already set up in that AWS account. It's just like a Postgres database, but you can imagine that might be whatever. I have Intercom set up on my website as an example of a third-party tool. This is just to be able to demo what that looks like to be able to integrate a third-party tool. And Intercom is pretty popular. And then I have a Fivetran account. The reason I have a Fivetran account is to be able to sign up for that, you actually have to go through a demo process. They do have a free trial I think you can get started with right away. But to skip sort of I don't want to get on a call with the Fivetran rep right now. So I have the Fivetran account already set up. You could also do this with Stitch. Stitch is this other service. That one is free to sign up from Go. And so Fivetran I think is a little bit easier to demo for the sake of this, but Stitch would work more or less the same. I will, in the process of this, set up Redshift, which is pretty straightforward. I will sign up for Mode and set that up, and I will sign up for Segment and set that up. But this is kind of where everything is. All right, so now comes the part where we see if this actually works. OK, so to also kind of go through that, this is my fake company. It is a video conferencing software platform. Where's my mouse? So it's like this really rich website with 3 pages on it. This is also set up the AWS. So this is my AWS account that I set up. Again, there's not a whole lot in here. It's just this dummy account. Here is Intercom. You don't really need to see this. There's like nothing really here other than you can see it works. I think if I write something here, you'll see this actually is real. Okay. This is the Intercom account that I will integrate into the warehouse. You can see that ticket. And this is the Fivetran account. So in Fivetran's case, again, this is what Fivetran looks like. I already have Fivetran set up here, but this is what it would be if you actually signed up for it fresh. And finally, this fake website is hosted on Heroku, which I'll have to add something to in a minute. But that's why this is here, so we can watch that as it happens. All right, so the first thing to do here is setting up Redshift. So what does that actually take? So all you got to do is when you're in this console, you click on Services. You can search for Redshift. Click on Redshift. And then from there, you can quick launch a cluster. It'll ask you to do some stuff. So there's a couple options here. You don't actually have to really make any real decisions on this. So you're choosing the different size of the database, like the different types of nodes. These basically depend on like the choices here. The size of it means like how much stuff can you put into it. It also determines how fast your queries run. You can scale these things up after the fact. You don't have to actually make a decision now for the specific ways of doing it. For the sake of this, I'll just make it a 1-node kind of small cluster. And then we'll call this like demo SF. And then I have a place where I'm going to pull some names from. Let's call it demo. AWS user, my exciting password. So that's basically it. And then if I launch it, it'll do some stuff, and now it takes a few minutes to get created. And so if I click on clusters here, you'll see that this is now being created, and it'll take a moment for that to actually spin up. So while we are waiting on that, this is a time that I can actually answer some questions. All right, there's one question here so far, which is, how do you handle things like data lineage, data governance, compliance, GDPR, right to be forgotten, and other things like MDM as a startup? Or are these problems that are for only more established enterprises come across? GDPR, sadly, is not a thing for only more established enterprises. We all have to do it. We don't get that choice. So for some of these, for things like data lineage, you can often actually punt on that. For data governance, in the sense of like who has access to what, you can often punt on that unless you're like a financial startup or a healthcare startup where there's reasons why your data needs to be sequestered in certain ways. For most companies, say you're building like a mobile app or something like that, it's not that important that data is sort of walled off from early stage employees. Oftentimes also early stage startups are engineers that have access to production systems anyway. And so regardless of like how you set up your sort of analytics infrastructure, people have access to just like production servers and can go query everything as they wanted to anyway. So I don't worry too much about those. I think, again, part of the way that you can solve that problem is building an ecosystem and an infrastructure that actually can scale to those things pretty well once you get there. But it's not something you typically have to worry about right away. For GDPR, I'm not an expert in that. There are some services out there now that will help you do that. There are a couple companies I know of that have set up that make it easy for you to basically like push button delete memory of user. How they do that, I actually don't know. But it's an important thing to think about, which is kind of the point of the whole regulation in the first place, is companies should be thinking about this from the ground up. That if you build something to be GDPR compliant from the beginning, it's not that bad, because you think about like, oh, we need to be able to delete this record. We need to be able to clear out our database in certain ways. We need to be able to like soft delete records in certain ways and hard delete others. If you don't think about that from the beginning, it becomes very hard to sort of back your way into that. So I don't have an answer as exactly the way to do that, but the fact that you have to think about it early is often kind of the point. All right, this is probably not ready yet. All right, still there. So what I'll do now in the meantime is, as this database is getting set up, the next thing I can do is actually implement segment. So segments, I haven't set anything up with segments. Say I want to start tracking like who's visiting my very exciting company page, or who's checking out who's working here, or going to my product page, and I want to be able to know that. So to do that, the first step I would take is go to Segment and sign up for it. So this is Segment. All you got to do is sign up. I will go back to my list of passwords. So this is the part where you get to watch me fill out some forms. So sure, not that one. All right, I agree. Cool. So then it'll ask you to do some stuff. So AWS demo company, or whatever. We're other. It's just me. I'm the CEO. Other. Sure. No, I don't want to demo. All right, so that's all it takes. So then it'll kind of walk you through the like onboarding flow. But now you actually have a segment account. That's all you need to do. If I click cancel here, this is now the place where I start integrating stuff. What I want to do is add a source. So a source is, like segment is, again, this routing layer. It has sources, which are the places where data is coming from. It has destinations, which are the places that we write data to. So if I click on add a source, I just want to add a website. It's the popular one. So I'll click on that. And then you don't actually need to do this, but I'll put it anyway. Oh, let's see, sure. And it can say, great, it has intercom already set up. It will figure that out, which is cool. But now, if I click on this, all I need to do is add this little bit of like tracking code to my website. So if I copy this and go into my website code, which is here. So here's my very complicated app that's powering the site. This is just like a JavaScript file that gets rendered on every page. It has the intercom thing here. Say I want to be able to add this segment thing. All I got to do is copy and paste the thing that I already added. And then I will deploy this. Make sure that got saved. If I can type. Segment. Y'all can all judge me for my console colors. All right, and now this will actually get pushed to that website. And so this is the other part of this where this takes a moment. So you can see this build is this thing over here is spinning, it's getting deployed. Great. This probably is not how you actually would deploy your website in your product. You probably have a much more rigorous way of shipping stuff to production, but whatever. OK, so in the meantime, we can go here and see if this database is ready. It appears that it is. So while that is being deployed, so this is the segment thing also is a part where there's some time that happens. Segment kind of has to like spin up, and the internet has to connect to other things on the internet. That is not the thing I know how it works. So now we have this Redshift database set up, though. So if we go back here, we have this demo SF database. If I click on it, I can now get all of the details about it. You can see various things about the health of it, which is typically marked as unhealthy right when it gets started. But like when I created it, the size of it and stuff like that, if I wanted to be able to modify it, I can do this and click on Modify Cluster, and that will let me, again, resize it and do a lot of the things I might want to do down the road. But in the meantime, I've got the important parts that I need, which are the credentials for it to be able to start connecting it to things. So if I copy this, I'll just paste this back on my list of stuff that I created here. So that's like the host of that warehouse. What that means now is I can actually connect that to Segment. So Segment is now kind of deploying to being able to record data from my website. I now want to be able to write it to a database. Great. I now have all the things I need, and I have that database already set up. So I will do that. So if I go back into Segment, I now click on Destinations, Add Destination. Can search for Redshift. And then it will ask me to fill these things out, which I will do. Oops. Let's see. Demo AWS user. All right. So that's it. That's all it takes. So now, as soon as the piece is deployed on the website, it will actually start writing data into Redshift. There's a little bit of a caveat to that, which is the free version of Segment, which I'm currently using, writes it in Redshift once a day. It doesn't do it like, it's not like a live streaming thing. You can pay for Segment to be able to write it on a much more sort of regular cadence. For this free one, I'm not going to do that. So there's a little bit of like a Martha Stewarding here that will happen of me switching it out to another database that already has that data in it. But it would be in there if y'all came back tomorrow. So now we can actually go here and see if this thing is being, the Segment data is being recorded from the website into where Segment would write it to. So an easy way to do that is Segment also has this kind of handy tool where if I go to my sources and click on this, you can click on this debugger, which will show you the live events as they come in. This is like live for the debugging purposes. Again, it's not ready to get to Redshift yet. So if I reload this page and go here, it may not be ready yet. Let's see. Nope, it probably is. Click on the product page. So there it is. So now Segment is already recording that. So if I click on this, you can see the information it got about it. It like tracks the URL, it tracks the title of the page and various other things. It also has like my IP address and gives me like a user ID and things like that. And so if I click around on other parts of the site and get rid of this part, you'll see those new pages actually came in as logs. And so again, this is already, now because it's connected to Redshift, whenever it runs its next sync to the database, there will be a table called Pages, which is every page view of anybody who's come to my site. It'll keep track again of all of this different information about the page that they saw, the user, the refer from where it came from, timestamps, all the stuff that's really useful for being able to track the way that people move through that app. So yeah, so that's all like pretty straightforward to set up. So the next couple things you might want to do is now I have data in this application database. So I've got a Postgres database, for instance, that's maybe the application behind this tin cans video conferencing software. I also might want to write data from intercom. So I have this, this intercom instance where I want to be able to understand, well, how are these people writing in tickets? Maybe I really care about looking at those tickets and analyzing that with other part of the behavior. So I can do all of this through Fivetran. Again, if I wanted to get stuff set up from scratch, all you got to do is start a free trial, fill out some information, and you'll be good to go. Actually, you don't need to start a conversation with a salesperson anymore with Fivetran, which is great. So I could have done this from zero, but I won't do that. Instead, we have an existing Fivetran account already. So in order to set it up, you just add a warehouse. So this would be like SF Redshift. This is the warehouse I want to write it to. So I have one already, Redshift. Get to fill out some more credentials. Demo. AWS user. This host. There are different options here for connecting. So these things are for if your database is behind a firewall and things like that. Those are all things you probably should actually do. For the sake of this demo, one of the parts that I actually kind of did skip was the Redshift database isn't as secure as you might want it. You would probably want to put up different sort of like VPC configurations and stuff like that. That is the last thing you want to watch me do is like go through that hell. So I will not do that here, but all you got to do then is save it. Fivetran will now connect to that Redshift database, and then it will attempt to test it and do some various stuff. And then it was able to connect, so there it's good. So now Fivetran is ready to be able to write stuff into that database. So that's all it took to be able to do that. The last thing I then have to do is actually start writing other sources from Fivetran into this warehouse. And so that's very straightforward. There's a couple of different things you can do. So now I have this set up. All I got to do is click on connectors, create your first connector. I can set up this Postgres database that I have. So this was a sample Postgres database that was an RDS database. Again, you could set up kind of from wherever you wanted to. Same sort of deal. So just fill out some database credentials. So in this case, we've got another host. We've got a database. We've got a user. Again, you have more options for connecting the way it can connect if you're behind firewalls and things like that. For this, we're going to do the simple version, which doesn't require any of that, except this scary TLS certificate thing. And then you're good to go. So now this is connected. And what this is if as soon as if I go back over into this connection, it's been paused, which is fine. All I got to do is turn it on, and it will start syncing these tables. And so you've got these tables here that I've set up. So again, for this fake company, there's like calls, companies, and users. I actually also put some segment data in there that's a real data thing, again, for the sake of the like Martha Stewarting, Julia Childing, whatever cooking show it is, because the actual segment data won't be there. So if I enable this, now it will actually begin syncing data from this warehouse into Redshift. And I can actually track the progress of that directly here. So you can see it starting to sync historical data. And then this takes a few minutes, but you'll see it start to populate here as it begins to fill out that data. The last thing I might want to do is actually connect data from third-party SAS applications. So in this case, I have intercom. You could imagine it being anything. So all I got to do is go back to one of these connectors, add another connector. This one's even easier. You don't have to watch me fill out any forms. All you have to do is authorize it. And so this will take you through kind of an OAuth flow through intercom. If I authorize access, that's all it needs. Now intercom and intercom and Fivetran can talk to each other. And now that connector is set up. And so for any of these other third-party SaaS applications that you might be using, that's typically all it takes, is you to be able to click a couple buttons, authorize some stuff, and then you're good to go. So now this thing, it always has this giant bar here. I don't know why that's there. It'll go away. But if I click on this Postgres thing, you can see kind of this tiny little sliver of, this is the time it's been syncing. So it's been syncing for 1 minute and 10 seconds, pulling data from that Postgres database that I connected into Redshift. So now I have everything feeding in. So like the place that I'm in now, that seems pretty simple. As someone who had to build a lot of this stuff from scratch 6-7 years ago, this is something that all of y'all should appreciate. This was something that took us months and multiple engineers to build, and we built a lousy system that couldn't maintain itself, and we had to have a bunch of people always debugging these pipelines. And in the matter of 20 minutes, We have a very performant warehouse up and running. We have data feeding from multiple sources into that warehouse. We have data feeding from an event log from our website. Like all of that stuff is stuff that is a pain to build, and now is stuff that you can like literally do in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes. And so this also is something that, again, this will scale. That this is the system Mode use. Mode is a company that is like 5 years old. I don't know how much data we have because it's kind of a silly question. But it's something where like this works for a company of 100 people and the data infrastructure that we need. We have the exact same thing. Like these are the tools that we use, and it scales that well. And it's, again, something you can do in like 15 minutes. If you tried to build this before a while ago, you should all be amazed. These products are great. So where does that then leave us? Again, the last thing is like, how do I actually look at any of this? Like, great, so we've got a bunch of data in a Redshift database. What do I do with it? The final mile there is setting it up through something like Mode. So I'm logged in, so let's log out of that. So if I go to Mode and just go to mode.com, so all I need to do is sign up, and then I can connect this to this Redshift database to sign up. I have one last form to fill out. So let's see. Give it a password. Nope, I'm signing in. That wasn't what I wanted to do. For all the products to sign up with, you think I know how to sign up with this one? All right. Sign up. Get this password again. Benn SF demo. All right, so then it'll take you through what you want to use it for. Say you want to use it for work. So I'd create an organization as kind of the bucket for your stuff. So Mode, SF, AWS demo, sure. So I'll do that. And then say I want to connect the database. Click on Redshift. Fill out one last form with these credentials, which y'all are probably sick of watching me do. Name, demo. All right, so now it's connected. And so if I go to this, I will get dropped into this new organization that I just created. If I want to write a query, I can click on that. You'll get a nice message from Taylor. And then now Mode is syncing over, like it's pulling data from what's in that warehouse. You have this sidebar of your tables here. This will take a moment to populate as we collect that data. Also, I'm not sure if anything's successfully written in there yet, but we can check on that from Fivetran. But this is now a live connection to that Redshift database that I can do whatever I want with. And so that's kind of the final step. If this is okay, so this is now synced. So say I want to ask questions of this, like where do I go now? This is the point at which you can actually start building out dashboards. You can actually start saying we want to deliver information to other people around the business on how people are using our product. So I have a couple things that I've written. I'm not entirely sure if this data has successfully synced yet, so we will see. I think this should be good. Nope, that's not how you comment stuff out. So this is, if this works, which I think it will, cool. So this is a list of all of the calls that have been synced over from that application database. Oops, can't highlight it. And so say I wanted to actually build out like a dashboard of the number of calls or how long those calls are. I can do that. And so all I need to be able to do that is now this is sort of a Mode demo of sorts. But I want to make a chart of how many calls I get a day. I can make that. And then I want to be able to make another chart of, say, the duration of those calls or the distribution of the duration of those calls. I can make that. And then if I want to be able to make a little dashboard out of that, I have a way to do that. And now I can send this out. And this is kind of ugly, but you get the idea. Now I can distribute this out. And again, this is going from having nothing set up, having no infrastructure at all, to me being able to set up a dashboard that I can actually schedule. It can run live. It's running on top of data that is being fed into a warehouse that is managed somewhere else. And I can distribute this out over email or Slack, all again, having built that in half an hour. And so again, you can continue to add a lot more pieces to this. Say you want to ask a much richer question. I have a second sort of sample query here of say you want to be able to ask a question like, the time until someone joins a call. Maybe you're trying to build this video conferencing thing, and you want to know how long do we like give people a little waiting screen, or the obnoxious Uber conference like jingle thing. How long do we like get people to listen to that? And you can try to figure that out, and there's like simple ways to do that with the data that's already there. And again, this is something that all the data will automatically be fed into. It's something that you can continue to build on top of, and everything again can be set up in the half hour that it took me to do this. So with that's kind of the end of this part of the demo. That's like all it really takes. If you wanted to set up more integrations through something like Fivetran, you can do that. If you want to use other services, again, you can connect a lot of different pieces with that. But that's really the whole sort of meat of what it takes. So with that, I can turn to questions. I have some here. I'm also happy to answer any questions that folks have around the room. And then happy if people want to try to like set stuff up or play around with this on their own. If you have computers, more than happy to help debug some of that. I heard that you can use Fivetran for more than just web data. Why use Segment for more than just web data? Why use Fivetran for cloud app integrations when Segment supports many cloud apps? Segment does support cloud apps, just a lot fewer. So I can actually show you, since we're in the tool. If I want to be able to set up a new source in Segment, the sources here, well, they don't make it that easy to, yeah. So they don't have that many. So they have a few email tools. They have a few for the help desks. They have a few, like there's on the order of probably 20 here. Fivetran and Stitch, because this is the core of what they do, support 150 or something. It's a much richer list of integrations. Segment has a lot more integrations that they can write to. So one of the other things Segment does, in addition to writing to a warehouse, you can also write to ad tracking software and things like that. That's kind of was the original product they built was that. But there's a much sort of smaller list of integrations there. Segment's a good product for this. If you're using these sorts of tools, great. Like by all means, consolidate into one tool. But I think what we found from most folks is they often run into limitations pretty quickly, and they end up needing to integrate other third-party applications that aren't in this list. What are some useful tools for identifying latency bottlenecks? It depends probably on where that latency is. If the latency is in your pipeline, these tools themselves actually will do some of that tracking. So in Segment's case, there's not really any data in here for you to be able to see. But they do have, it may not actually be in their free version. They do have ways to be able to see like the latency of data that's getting written in, how many errors they're having and things like that. Fivetran also has this kind of nice little dashboard of like syncs and how long they're taking if you want to see the latency of those syncs. There are other tools, more sort of like DevOps infrastructure tools that you can also instrument here. So New Relic can do some of this, especially if you're like spinning up your own pipelines. Tools like Honeycomb can manage some of this. We use Honeycomb for some of our own services. Depends on the kind of latency that you're trying to track. If you're looking for like latency in web load times and you want to understand the performance of your infrastructure, often tools like New Relic are a better solution for that than this sort of thing. That's like a little bit of a different type of analysis that you might do. Can I have multiple organizations in mode? Yes. So if I go here back into mode, if I want to be able to switch into a new organization, I can just add another one. We do have some folks that are like consultants that are actually bouncing around between a lot of these. If you also want to be able to do that in a way like managing governance through that kind of system, you can. That's also true for Fivetran and Segment. A lot of these tools follow the same pattern that we do, and we follow the same pattern as something like GitHub, where a user is associated with multiple organizations. And Segment, I can also do the same thing and be a part of addition. I have like these concept of a workspace that's the same thing. So you can manage that across multiple organizations. If all the logs are stored in CloudWatch, is there a way to pull the data from there? I don't actually know that. I would imagine yes. So one of the things that's very nice about the AWS ecosystem, and it's all very interconnected. There's often ways. They have a couple products. They have a product called Glue that is kind of these pipelines. They have a couple products that work pretty well there. I would imagine if you just Google like writing CloudWatch logs into Redshift, you will find some answer. I don't know exactly what that is, but AWS does a very nice job of like integrating across most of these systems. Everything seems to be like something that's built on top of, it's like S3 with EC2 on top, so they all seem to talk pretty well together. I don't know for sure that you can do that, but I would be surprised if you can. When should I opt for a data lake instead of a data warehouse? So in some ways, you don't have to make that choice. It depends on the problem that you have. A lot of folks that we know, especially when they run into scale problems, which tends to be the reasons that people choose a data lake in the first place, is they use something like Athena or Snowflake, which is an AWS competitor, that separates compute from storage. Essentially what that lets you do is it lets you dump a bunch of data into S3. So you just like dump all of your data into kind of an unstructured way in S3. Then you have a compute layer that sits on top of that handles defining your schema, and then handles when you're querying it, so you don't actually have to pay for the storage of this like massive amount of log data. If you're trying to write something like CloudWatch, for instance, which generates a ton of data, dumping it into S3 and then putting like Athena on top of that is often a pretty good solution. AWS has ways to be able to kind of combine those. So for instance, if you have a bunch of data in S3, which can be your data lake, they have a service called Spectrum, which is essentially like Redshift. It's querying S3 through Redshift. So Spectrum is a way where you actually can interface with it as though it is the same as Redshift. You can keep some data in Redshift, you can keep some data in S3 in this data lake, and then Spectrum sort of treats them all as the same. So they can all just be tables to you, but underneath the hood, some of them are like hot tables in Redshift, and some of them are more cold tables in S3. In general, we recommend systems like that because to the end user, they don't have to then distinguish, like, is this in my data lake? Is it in a warehouse? How do I manage the systems between the two? There are now ways you can kind of like punt on that question a little bit and get a little bit of the best of both worlds. Are there different plot types for mode provide? What are they? God, I can't read. What are the different plot types mode provides currently, and is offering exciting plot types something mode is focused on developing? Of course we are. So there are different kinds of plots. I made some very boring line charts. You can see, ooh, that was the wrong button. You can see a list of stuff here. So you have bar charts and scatter plots and pie charts and mixed type charts and those sorts of things. We're adding to that list. Like that's the thing people always want. We always want to add more charts, and the fun stuff like box and whisker plots and stuff is kind of on the sort of backlog of things we want to get to. The other thing that Mode does, as a brief sell here, is we want to make it very customizable for folks. So when you're building out these reports and dashboards, yes, you get this kind of drag and drop thing for you to be able to organize it however you want. But in reality, what we're actually just giving you is a web page. And so you can actually edit this underlying, this underlying web page directly. You can kind of see like this is just some like templated HTML for you can see here's this chart and all that sort of stuff. But I can actually add whatever I want here. So if I want to put something here, I can do that. OK. So you actually can edit this page directly. This is just HTML that you have access to. And you can do much more customizable stuff. That slide from way back when, that kind of like sunburst chart, the thing with the circles and the little spikes, was actually something that somebody built in Mode using this custom HTML. So it's like a D3 visualization they built here. So kind of whatever you want to build, you can build on top of that. What are combination of services are good for managing and analyzing IoT data streams? Probably, honestly, the same stuff. You just have to worry about scale. So something like the Kinesis Firehose is probably better for that. I am not someone who has a deep understanding of IoT anything, but my general understanding is the biggest difference between IoT data and other data is there's just a ton of it. The Firehose can manage a really high volume of data. There are some other services that are related to that or similar that can manage very, very large volumes of data that are basically just these very fast and wide pipes. Those are often good solutions. In those cases, I would recommend the like Athena, Snowflake type of setup. We are not actually funneling all of that data into Redshift. Redshift does get expensive if you put a ton of log data in it. And so doing that in the sort of split way is often a better solution. But we would still recommend putting something into a warehouse like that as opposed to trying to spin something up yourself, because that's often very hard. Can I set up data access for different users in Mode? Yes. So if I were to go, this is a free account. You can on the free account. On the paid account, if I were to go to that connection that I set up, you can define who has access to it. You can also define who has access to different reports. So say I want to be able to say who can see this and who can't, versus who can like query data against this warehouse and not. You can do that. Can I embed visualizations within Mode? Yes. So again, through the same way, if I wanted to like embed a YouTube video here, I could do that. It's just like the HTML. You can embed. Mode also supports embeds as well. You can embed Mode in other places. If you really want to make it weird, you can embed mode inside of itself. There are probably reasons why the engineers at Mode would hate it if I said that, but you can. Can I self-host Mode in AWS? No, you cannot. Mode is already in AWS. Why would you want to do that? No, like I get it. There's reasons why people might not want to be able to put this in a cloud service. We do not offer that. We are a hosted version only. You can connect to databases that are behind firewalls that don't have to be hosted. We have options for connecting to different things, but you cannot run the application itself in your own AWS instance. Does Mode have create write access to the database? Depends on how you set it up. It does now because I connected like an admin user to it. I can create tables and drop tables and stuff like that. We typically do not recommend that, but when I set it up, it inherits the permissions of the user that I connect it to. So if I connected a read-only user, the user in Mode would have a read-only access. If the user only has access to certain tables, we only have access to certain tables. Our like interface with your database is how you define it. And so that can be managed however you want. Is there a way to identify, quantify packet loss from the infrastructure itself? So this is always like a tough problem. It's basically like, how do you know what you don't know? On the Segment side, they do a pretty good job of it. This is one of the reasons we like encourage people to use Segment as opposed to necessarily self-hosting their logging infrastructure. Is Segment manages a lot of this for you. It manages a lot of the like when retries and things like that. They try to identify when something goes wrong. They give you little dashboards to be able to see here are the places we had failures. On the Fivetran ETL side, frankly, no, they actually don't give you much visibility there, and that is like because if they knew about it, they would be able to sync it, but they don't know about it, so they can't. There are some times where they recognize, hey, we failed to sync this record, and we can tell you that. But there are certainly questions of like, how do you know everything's getting synced? You don't, unfortunately. If you were to build it yourself, you wouldn't either. Some of this is like you have to be trusted that is the core of what their product is, and you hope that it works. Their entire business is built on that actually functioning. But there's not like a clear way to know that because in some ways they don't know that, and that's why it's hard. Do I need to learn how to create a data warehouse schema when importing, or can I just import your data tables wholesale and Mode will figure it out? You can just import it wholesale. So Mode doesn't actually import data. Mode is sitting on top of your database, and when you write queries, it is querying that database live. You don't actually have to like write a job to import anything into Mode. For something like Fivetran, when you set it up, you can just import everything. That will sync data from one warehouse to another, or you can selectively choose which columns and tables to sync. But in Mode, you're actually writing those things directly, so you don't actually have to write any sort of imports. Is there a way to tag every packet? I'm not entirely sure I understand what that means. There is, if every packet is every event, no. Though Segment, when you write in events from Segment, Segment has like unique IDs for those events. On the more Fivetran side, they don't actually tell you like which sync something came from. That's a thing that if it's useful, I would tell Segment or tell Fivetran. But I actually don't know. I'm not sure I'm answering this question correctly. But no, to my knowledge, there's not a way to do what I would define as tagging every packet. That is all the questions here. You sir had a question?
So you're giving out your AWS credentials in order to have the data go into these into Redshift.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do due diligence for a company that you're handing those over to know that they have good security?
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything you can do, considering you're potentially opening up a security risk?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you can do to mitigate that security risk?
Yeah. So in this very simple demo, everything was sort of open. Like you have to have passwords and stuff, but it's like there's no IP restrictions and things like that. Typically, if we were to do this in a more production way, in Amazon you can control like the IPs that can connect to different things. So we would typically put things in like VPCs, restrict which IPs can talk to it in certain ways. Like for instance, if you see when you connect a thing here, if I connect a database here and choose Redshift, it'll give you the IPs that we connect through. And that's also true of Fivetran or Segment, that you can also just whitelist those IPs, so that way you're at least constrained, like the vulnerability is at least constrained to the IPs of the service that you are granting it. There's other things you can also do for like the different options for connecting. You don't have to connect actually directly over the internet. We have a way for connecting to things behind VPCs, so you don't actually have to whitelist IPs. Same for 5-train and segment. It's basically like setting up SSH tunnels. The last question though is like, how do you trust the service itself? Like maybe the service itself isn't secure. Part of that has to come from, there's sort of two answers to that. One is there are like audits and stuff like that all of us do. There's compliance standards you have to meet. Like we were audited by outside vendors that we have to meet certain certifications and stuff like that say, hey, we have followed these practices. We encrypt data in certain ways. When people come to our office, they're required to sign in. There's a ton of different sort of protocols like that. The other part is really just like social proof. If it's got a big customer base, like Mode's business very much depends on people not actually getting access to your data when we connect to a warehouse. Same with 5-Trans, same with Segment, same with AWS for that matter. And so you just have to, like, part of the thing that we have to build as a company is just the trust of the customer base that yes, we are going to handle their things responsibly and appropriately. And I think that's just something that comes over time. Like the fact you're putting it in AWS, people don't actually ask that many questions about because of where AWS is now. For earlier stage companies, it's a little bit more of a question, and so it's kind of who are your customers, what security protocols do you follow? There's not really a great answer for that. In some cases, it depends on your risk profile. If you're JP Morgan, you probably care about it differently than if you're a 3-person startup that's trying to build an app for connecting people to dog walkers. That probably has like location data that's actually very sensitive. All right, are there any other questions before we wrap this up? I'm happy to also come around and answer questions individually if folks would like, but otherwise that's all I've got.